why is it that a marketer-managed customer data platform is key? Right?
It's key because if marketers don't manage it, they're not going to get what they want. I mean, that, you know, marketer managed really means it's packaged software. Packaged software really means that you don't have to rely on IT. You can make more decisions for yourself. Making more decisions for yourself means you get what you want. So there's a kind of a long logic chain. But at the end of the day, the reason it matters is because marketers are the only ones who really understand what they want. It's hard for them to articulate it. It changes all the time. There are new things all the time. You know, there are a lot of reasons that they can't go through the traditional waterfall development process with structured specs and stuff because, you know, something happened yesterday they have to respond to today, and they just can't wait for it. So that's why it's important to have that flexibility. That's why marketer management is so important. But again, there's lots of technical work required, lots of technical skills required. They can't do it by themselves, but they can be more in control. And if you make, and the technology makes it easier for the technical people who are doing the work, so they can react more quickly to the marketer's instructions.
And so purely in terms of the other aspect that you touched upon later in your presentation was that it's also meant for a non-technical user.
Right.
So I presume it's also about having a database that actually makes sense to a marketer to operate with, right?
Yeah, there's lots of aspects to you know, making it usable by a non-technical person. One is a data model that is, well, actually customer-centric, so, you know, organized around the customer ID is the primary key, but also is presented in a way that marketers can understand, because marketers don't like to read, you know, entity relationship diagrams. It's kind of like usually not covered in Marketing 101. So you have an interface that lets you understand your data, an interface that lets you do stuff, create segmentations. You know, if you can write SQL code, you don't need an interface. You just write SQL code. Most marketers don't write SQL code, and if they do, it's probably got mistakes in it. So you don't really want to writing SQL code. So those kinds of things and lots of other activities beyond creating segments that market, you know, setting up schedulers. So just, there's a lot of stuff you want to be able to do that if you have an interface makes it easier, that lets the marketer either do it for themselves or make it easier for the marketing ops person. You know, even within marketing, just as with, say, marketing automation or CRM, you have an administrator and you have, you know, operation, you know, marketing ops people who are pretty technical and pretty much specialized and learn the tool. And, you know, it doesn't mean that they're programmers because they're working with an interface, but they get really good at it. And they're the ones who are kind of going to do anything complicated. You're not going to have every little assistant product manager in every group go off and, you know, start magically creating campaigns and segments, and you shouldn't.
Makes sense. So when we were talking about some of the use cases of the CDP, I guess 3 or 4 things obviously stood out: personalization, customer insights, measurement. So we talked about things like consistent experience was sort of all the way down, right? But I guess as sort of the adoption of customer data and as the adoption of use cases goes up, we will reach that point where things like consistent experience become critical. Do you see that happening in the financial services space? Because one of the things that, you were giving that anecdote about your wife, one of the things I heard from my wife was that, you know, pretty much, and because we were, I obviously was, I'm building Lemnisk, we are all building Lemnisk here together, and her question was, look, it's not really impacting my customer experience. I still get an email which has absolutely no relation to the SMS that I get, which in turn has absolutely no relation to the message that I see when I go to the website, right? And then when I open the app, which she often uses for doing transactions, that is sending a completely different message. So,
and it's all your fault.
Yeah, it's my fault. At least I would like to believe that I would want to change that, right? So do you see these use cases becoming, because I see that the CDP is in a very central position to really tackle these kinds of problems as well. Do you see that happening already, even though the percentage is low? And how do you see this evolving?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the advanced organization, that top 10%, can do that and does do that. But it's it's hard because, again, you have to have the organization in place. There are a lot of issues that have nothing to do with technology that make that as rare as it is. So we have no clue, to be honest, what the penetration rate of CDP is in the industry. And maybe it's higher than 10%, and maybe it's lower. It's probably lower. But as we saw in that one side, even a third of the people who had CDPs didn't have their data unified, their systems unified, let alone the experience unified, which is even harder thing to do.
Yeah.
So, there are places that do it, but they really are places that have made that a very high priority and have organized everything to make it possible. They've done a big effort, going through a digital transformation effort, most likely, to make that possible. So that's the goal. I think for most of it, everybody would say, of course, they want that. But you really have to make it work, which takes management commitment. I mean, that's a top-down thing, because you have a lot of departmental heads to knock together to make that happen, to align. We don't knock heads together.
So I guess just staying on that topic then, so org structure is probably, or maybe historically, the way digital marketing has evolved probably, it's sort of become very channel centric, right? Mm-hmm. So you have a sort of email team that probably sends out email. And so what do you, and part of getting the CDP implementation right also involves the probably harder part of changing the organization towards making the customer at the heart of everything, right?
Right. We need to be customer-centric, which, again, is another thing that we all say we want to do, but haven't necessarily had the organizational commitment to do. And, the other dimension in financial services in particular, you have that channel dimension. You also have the product dimension, the product managers, who are all beating on the email guides and, no, send out my email, send out my emails. So there's somebody who has to arbitrate those as well. Yeah. Again, not really the CDP's problem. The CDP makes it easier to solve. Okay, if I can solve that by just setting up a matrix in the CDP, then I still have to negotiate that matrix with all the departments involved. But at least once I have it negotiated, I can make it happen relatively easily. And that's a big step. So it removes one of the multiple barriers.